starting a new sermon series on the book of Ruth, a book that is, of course, about a woman named Ruth from Moab. The story is about Ruth's journey from her homeland in Moabite to the town of Bethlehem, where she is traveling not only from the country of her forefathers and the culture and the religions that she's grown up with, she's also making a transition from being a single woman to being a part of a family. But even more important, she's making a spiritual journey from being someone who is an adherent of the religion of the Moabites to a follower of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so it's a long journey. It's not long geographically, but it's long experientially. And so we're going to start looking at the beginning of her story today. Ruth is a significant character in the scriptures because she is one of the people that God puts into the family tree that leads to Jesus. So she's a pretty big deal, even though she's a part of a pretty short book that a lot of people overlook. Ruth's story begins with her future in-laws, Elimelech and Naomi, and their two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. Elimelech and Naomi, they live in Bethlehem, and a famine strikes the land, and so they decide to travel to Moab to find food. It's kind of an ironic move because Bethlehem means house of bread. And so they're leaving the house of bread to go looking for bread. It's just kind of an ironic move, but yet I know I would do the same thing if I were in their shoes. If I had kids at home that were expecting me to provide food for, and I had to travel to another place, say like Texas, looking for food, then I probably would do that. It's kind of a sensible move if you think about it. They pack up, they travel to Moab, and shortly after they arrive in Moab, we don't know how much time, but shortly after they arrive, Elimelech passes away. No reasons given, just the fact of his passing. Well, that leaves Naomi with just two sons. Shortly, the good news is that Mahlon and Chilion married Moabite women. Ruth, who we're going to talk about in the story, and Orpah. It's not Oprah, it's Orpah. I wanted you to know that because I had to work really hard to stop saying Oprah. Ruth and Orpah are the daughters-in-law now of Naomi, so it's just the three of them. The five of them. Ruth, her two sons. God, can we start over? Matt, can we just y'all want to come do a song? We'll start again. Naomi, her two sons, and her daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah. About 10 years after the passing of Elimelech, the sons die also. Again, we don't know why, we don't know the circumstances, but their names might be a clue because Mahlon means something like sickly, and Chilion means something like wasting. But the boys have died, and so now it's just the three women. Naomi has lost her husband and her sons. It's a terrible, terrible situation to be in. Psychologists, when they rank the painful events of life that are the most disruptive and destabilizing for a person, the death of a spouse is at the top of the list. And so she's had that experience, but she's also lost her sons, which is crushing. It's devastating. That was her and her husband's legacy, and now they're gone. So those experiences of loss are just incredible for her. I've gotten ahead of myself. We were going to show you a map. You know, we have to show maps during sermons at Peachtree City United Methodist Church. In fact, we'll just go and take a look at the map. Yeah. In honor of Matt, the Mapster Stone. They travel from Bethlehem around to Moab. It's through some really, really terrible, difficult terrain. They pass over the Jordan River, all the land around that body of water, which is the Dead Sea, by the way. And they call it dead for a reason because nothing, absolutely nothing can live in it, except maybe a few algae, some funguses or whatever. But no good seafood for catching for supper. But they travel around there. That entire terrain is inhospitable. They call it wilderness. We would call it desert. There's sharp rocks. There's not streams. There's not plants. There's nobody with shops open selling food. It's about a 7 to 10 day journey on foot. We don't know exactly how far into Moab they went, but we can assume they didn't go any further than they needed to. Another thing that's worth noting is the Moabites and the Judites did not care for one another. The antipathy that we still see in the Middle East has ancient roots. It goes way, way, way back in history. And so these were two groups of people that did not like each other. So it's safe to say that life in Bethlehem must have been terrible for them to decide that they want to travel all the way to Moab. So anyway, catching back up with where I was, Elimelech's passed away. The two sons have passed away. And the author of the book says the woman was left without her two sons and her husband. She's the most vulnerable that she could possibly be. She really has lost everything. And whether that's a worldview that makes sense to us in today's world, her position was that she had no protection, she has no provision. She is absolutely living at risk. So word comes to Naomi that the famine back home is ended, and so she decides to make a return trip to Bethlehem. And shortly after setting out, she turns to her daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, and she encourages them to go back home to their families. They can go back, they can find new husbands, they can remarry, they can have children, raise families of their own. They can have a future. And so Naomi is encouraging them to go back home. And Ruth and Orpah are sad, but they just say, you know what, we're gonna stay with you. We've made a commitment, we're gonna stay with you. You're our family now. And Naomi keeps insisting them, and we're gonna read her words together because her words carry a very sharp tone. Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I should have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you then wait until they were grown? Would you then refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, it has been far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of the Lord has turned against me. Now, honestly, Naomi has experienced incredible loss here. Husband, children. Those are horrible. Those are crushing. Those are life rearranging. But those are not the only losses that she's experienced. When her sons were married for 10 years or so, you would assume there would be grandchildren. It was unusual that there were not grandchildren. Now, we don't know for a fact that there ever were. Maybe they were never born. Maybe they were born and died of an illness early. We just don't know. But the absence of grandchildren is still a kind of loss for her, because you would normally expect that there would be grandchildren on the scene. And as I said earlier, she is financially completely vulnerable. She has no means to produce an income without a husband and without sons. She can either live on the charity of other people, that's probably not what she's going to get living in the land of Moab, or she can go back home to reconnect with her larger family. So her situation is desperate. She deserves our compassion. She deserves our sympathy. And she says this interesting thing. The hand of the Lord has turned against me. The hand of the Lord has turned against me. That's how she feels, and I understand that. I've had seasons in my life where I didn't use those words, but I felt that I could not understand what God was doing or not doing in my life. I was confused. I didn't have a clue where things were headed. I felt frustrated in those seasons. Maybe you've had an experience like that too, where you're just not sure where God is at and what God is doing. She also said to her daughters, even if I thought there was no hope for me. She is hopeless. She feels despair. She feels that there is no future, that there is no way forward for her. And that's an understandable way for her to feel. So Naomi begins this trip to Bethlehem. It's interesting that she's determined to make that trip solo, because it would have been a phenomenally difficult trip for the three women without male protection and male provision, but yet she's determined to make the trip solo. Now, we're reading between the lines. The text clearly doesn't say this, but I wonder if she never intended to survive the journey, if she thought that that would be an end to her earthly story, if she tried to make this trip. She knew the terrain. She had only made it several years before. She knew what lay between her and Bethlehem. And I wonder if that's a part of why Ruth and Orpah initially insisted on staying with her, because they knew that Ruth couldn't possibly make that trip alone. So the women are crying, everybody's upset. Orpah finally gives in and goes back home. She returns to her family. She returns to the town she knew. She returned to the religion of her forefathers. Orpah decided to release the connection between her and Naomi. And Naomi turns to Ruth and says, look, Orpah's gone back. Why don't you go back too? She's gone back to her people and her gods. Go with her. And then Ruth says some famous words that many of us have heard, lovely words of commitment and devotion to another person. Ruth says, do not press me to leave you, to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do thus to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you. Such an incredible expression of devotion. That's why that text is often used at wedding ceremonies, because it is this intense, lifelong commitment of I am with you no matter what. And that's the commitment that Ruth makes to Naomi. What an interesting difference in mindset between Naomi and Ruth. Both of them are widows. Both of them are childless. Both of them are disconnected from their larger cultures. In fact, Ruth is leaving hers permanently. And yet, Naomi responds to all of her losses with a sense of hopelessness and a sense of despair. Ruth, on the other hand, makes a profound commitment, not only from her heart, but involving the rest of her life. She sees a future. And it's a hopeful future. It's a future that's full of possibilities. Naomi only sees what is impossible. Naomi only sees a dead end. But Ruth sees the way forward with Naomi and with Naomi's God. And so they get back to Bethlehem. Bethlehem's a small town. Everybody knows everybody. And when Naomi and Ruth arrive, the townspeople, they all take notice that someone's coming into town. It's a small place. And everybody knows everybody. And when Naomi and Ruth step into town, the people don't say, hey, Naomi, welcome back. They say, Naomi? Is that you? They don't recognize Naomi anymore. They aren't sure they do. It looks like someone they used to know, but the passage of time and the experiences of loss have changed Naomi. And so she doesn't look the same way that she used to. Naomi, is it you? And Naomi says, no, it's not. She puts it this way in the text. Naomi said, call me no longer Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? Naomi, is that you? No, I am Mara. The identity that she was given as a gift from her parents at her birth, the name Naomi, which means pleasantness, which means sweetness. That's no longer her name as she looks in the mirror. She says, I am Mara, I am bitter. I'm making that my name because that's who I am. I am bitter, no longer pleasant, no longer full of sweetness. Life is no longer full of joy. Life is only bitter, not sweet. I think it's an interesting mix in Naomi's telling of her own story between facts and perceptions. It is a fact that Naomi was a childless widow. That's a fact. It's a fact that she experienced incredible pain and grief due to those losses. It's a fact that she was very unlikely at her age to marry again and have children. Those are facts. Those are things that we can know to be true. But there are also some perceptions that Naomi is demonstrating here. The issue of it being unlikely for her to marry and have children doesn't mean it's impossible for her to marry and have children. And it's interesting that in her own faith story, just a few generations before, Naomi's ancestor Sarah was promised by God to have a child in her old age. And you may remember the story that Sarah laughed when she heard the news, but yet she gave birth to a son, and they named him Isaac, which means laughter. That was a part of Naomi's own faith story. She knew the story. And yet she said, it's impossible. It's impossible for me to marry, for me to have children, for me to have family again. Now, it's a likely and understandable point of view, but it's a perception, not a fact. She also has this thing that she says, God sent me away full, i.e., I had a husband and I had sons. God sent me away full, and now I'm back here empty. Therefore, I have nothing. And that too is a perception, because she doesn't have nothing. Yes, she doesn't have those people that she loves so dearly. Yes, there is a hole in her life where those people used to be. But it is not true that she has nothing. It's not true that she has no one. She has Ruth. Ruth is a gift to God, to her, in this very difficult season in her life. Ruth is someone that is profoundly committed to her as a family member. So while she may have people that she misses, it's not a fact. It's not true that she has no one and nothing. She has Ruth. She's back in her hometown. She has other relatives and friends that know her, that can care for her and be supportive to her. And finally, Naomi says, God is against me. Now, I understand why she feels that way. But is that a fact? I would suggest that it's just the way she feels, and it's the way she perceives things. We like to, I won't even say like, we feel a need to understand divine actions when things are going really well and when things are going really badly. We want to know, where is God in all of this? Where is God when I'm succeeding? Where is God when I'm failing? Where is God when I'm on the mountaintop? And where is God when I'm in the valley? Now, when we're succeeding, when we're on the mountaintop, when we're experiencing joy, when we're happy, we don't worry about that quite so much, though we can we can consider it. But when we're in the valley, when we're in the pit, when we're in the darkness, when the load is heavy, when our heart is breaking, it's a common human feeling. God, where are you in this? I don't understand what's happening. I don't like what's happening. Where are you? Are you against me? Are you ignoring me? Have you abandoned me? Do you even care about me? I felt that way before. I felt that way for a long time in one season of my life. Maybe you have too. Maybe you have wondered, God, where are you in my pain? Don't you see that I'm hurting? Naomi is not alone in her sentiment that God has turned against me, and she just can't understand. Paul wrote In Romans 11:33, no one can explain the things God decides or understand his ways. I think we can relate to Naomi's feelings about things, about wondering where God is. But I think it's worth remembering that even Jesus on the cross said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Just because we feel abandoned doesn't mean we are. Just because we hear only silence doesn't mean that God is not speaking. Just because we are in pain doesn't mean that God is not at work. Pain has a way of grabbing our attention forcefully. If you spill boiling water on your hand while you're making coffee, you're not going to be spending much time thinking about what you want to put on your toast. Pain just captures our attention, and it's very hard to think about anything else. But yet, look at these two women. Naomi, hopeless. Ruth, who was also in pain, full of hope, full of a vision for the future, and full of love for Naomi. Sorry, I'm editing because we're running out of time. When I was studying in preparation for this message, I was curious to understand more about what bitterness is. I thought I knew, but as I kept reading Naomi and Ruth's story and I kept just sort of meditating about it, I realized I really don't understand how to describe what bitterness is. I know it's a negative thing. I know that from the outside it looks a lot like anger. It looks a lot like sadness. And maybe it's those things and other things too, but I wanted to kind of figure some things out. So I did some research, and these are some of the short definitions that I found. Maybe they fit for you. Maybe they don't. If they're helpful, absorb it. If not, forget what I said. Bitterness is a rejection of hope. It's not just the absence of hope, it's a rejection of hope. Bitterness is a refusal to accept life as it is. Bitterness is an unyielding attachment to how we want life to be. Bitterness is a chosen disposition in response to pain. Bitterness is blindness to what is good in one's life. And lastly, bitterness is formed by experience combined with expectation. I like that last one especially because it reminds me of the story of Father Damien of Molokai. Father Damien was a Catholic priest from Belgium who volunteered to serve at the leper colony in Molokai, Hawaii, in the years from 1873 until his death in 1889. Father Damien was revered in the Catholic community globally because of his incredible devotion to serve those who were at the far, far, far edges of human society, people that other people were terrified to even be around. But Father Damien gave himself to serve those people who suffered incredibly. Of course, in time, Father Damien was diagnosed with leprosy. And what really made him have a point in history was his response when he got the news of his diagnosis. At a moment when any reasonable person would say, "Why me?" his answer was, "Why not me? Why not me? Why not me?" Damien and Ruth both show that while pain and suffering come to everyone, bitterness is not a mandatory response. There is an alternative. There is another way. There is a way that is filled with faith and hope. The thing I'd like to say to Naomi if she were here today is, Naomi, I understand your pain, and I'm sorry for what you've been through. But the truth is that you're not alone. You're not alone. God has given you a faithful, lifelong companion in your daughter-in-law. She is sharing with you a vision of how she's going to live with you, no matter what comes next, how she's going to be a faithful part of your life. You are back home in a place where you are known, in a place where you again can be loved, though you may not have a husband. That's what I would like to say to Naomi. Remember Ruth's words, where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Ruth foresees a future that will be a future for Naomi too, even though Naomi doesn't see it yet. She will, and that's what the rest of the book is about. We'll let Pastor Matt talk to us about that in the next 3 weeks. I want Naomi to know that God has shown up in Ruth. And through Ruth and through Naomi, God is building his kingdom. God is building the family that will bring Christ to the world. And even more for me and you, Ruth is a kind of example, I think, of God's faithfulness in our lives. Because I believe God says to me and to you, where you go, I will go. We don't think of God that way, I don't think. We think of God as being in some place that we have to get to, as a relationship we have to arrive at, that we have to make a journey from our Moab back to our Bethlehem. To get back to God, we have to go back home like the prodigal son. And yet I think the testimony of this story, as well as the witness of Scripture holistically, is that God pursues me and you. God doesn't sit somewhere waiting on us to stumble across. God doesn't hide himself, making us search until we happen to find him. God is pursuing us. God is looking for us before it even occurs to us to look for him. God is faithful toward us before it is a possibility for us to be faithful to him. Where you go, I will go. That's a picture of God's faithfulness in our lives. No matter how badly we fail, God chases after us. No matter how deep and dark our pain, God is with us. There's no place we can go. There's no experience we can endure that takes us beyond God's grace and God's desire to be with us. As Paul said in Romans chapter 8, I love this text. Spend some time in Romans chapter 8 this week, as well as the book of Ruth, because we're going to be reading and preaching about it the next few weeks. Romans chapter 8. Neither death, nor life, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus, our Lord.